They all thought I was weak. The quiet composer who wouldn't stand up for himself. The pushover husband who turned a blind eye to his wife's betrayal. When I saw my wife dancing intimately with her boss at that company gala, something inside me snapped. They had no idea that the man they mockingly called the silent husband was about to orchestrate the most devastating symphony of revenge this town had ever witnessed. By the time I was done with them, they'd learned the hardest lesson of all. The quiet ones are the most dangerous when pushed too far. I've spent a lot of time thinking about how marriages fall apart. It's rarely one big explosion, more like 1,000 tiny cuts until there's nothing left to bleed. Looking back, I could have spoken up more, could have demanded her attention instead of retreating into my work. But that's not who I am, and changing yourself to save something already broken is like trying to bail out a sinking ship with a teacup. My name is Miles Harrington. I'm 47 years old, and I compose music for a living, mostly film scores and occasionally video game soundtracks. My work requires isolation, focus, and long hours alone with nothing but my piano, my thoughts, and the complex digital workstation where I bring melodies to life. I won a few industry awards, nothing major, but enough to keep the projects coming in. I've never been comfortable in crowds, never enjoyed the spotlight. Ironic for someone who creates sounds meant to enhance other people's emotions. My home studio is my sanctuary. Soundproofed walls, acoustic panels, 3 keyboards, and enough technology to record an orchestra. It's where I feel most alive, most myself. I could spend 12 hours straight there, and it feels like minutes. My wife, Elise, used to call it my cave. Used to. These days, she doesn't call it anything at all. These days, we barely speak. Elise is everything I'm not. Outgoing, ambitious, always on the move. At 44, she's a senior pharmaceutical sales representative for Meridian Healthcare, one of the largest pharmaceutical companies in the country. Her job takes her all over the region, meeting doctors, attending conferences, giving presentations. She's good at what she does, too good, maybe. 3 promotions in 5 years, each one demanding more of her time, more travel, more late nights entertaining clients. When we first met 10 years ago, the differences between us seemed complementary. She brought excitement into my quiet world. I gave her a peaceful harbor from her hectic schedule. We balanced each other. But balance is a delicate thing, easily disturbed. I first noticed the change 3 years ago. The late nights became later. The business trips stretched from 2 days to 4, sometimes a week. Her phone was always in her hand, and she'd step out of rooms to take calls. When I asked questions, her answers were vague, dismissive. Just work stuff, Miles. You wouldn't understand. Eventually, I stopped asking. What was the point? She had made her choice, and it wasn't me. So I retreated further into my music, into the world where I had control, where notes followed my direction and melodies bent to my will. Our house became a hotel where 2 strangers occasionally crossed paths in the kitchen. I told myself I was fine with it. Some marriages evolve into something else, something comfortable but distant. I could live with that. Until I couldn't. I was deep into composing a tense string arrangement for a psychological thriller when Elise knocked on my studio door. This was unusual enough to make me pause mid-note. She rarely ventured into my creative space anymore. Miles. She opened the door without waiting for a response. We need to talk. I swiveled my chair away from my keyboard. Elise stood in the doorway, immaculate, as always in a tailored navy suit, her blonde hair pulled back in a sleek ponytail. Even after years together, her presence could still command a room. I'm listening, I said, removing my headphones. Meridian is having its annual executive gala next Saturday. Garrett specifically asked if you would come this time. Garrett Westfield, her boss, regional director for Meridian Healthcare, the man whose name appeared in our conversations with increasing frequency. I never met him, despite his apparent interest in my existence. I'm on a deadline, Elise. The director needs this score by Miles. She cut me off with that tone she used for difficult clients. This isn't optional. This is important for my career. Garrett is considering me for the national marketing team. If I get this promotion, you'll be traveling even more. I finished for her. She sighed, crossing her arms. It's one night, one dinner. You can manage that, can't you? Or is that too much to ask? There was something in her voice I couldn't quite place. Not just irritation, but something almost like desperation. I studied her face, seeing for the first time the faint shadows under her expertly applied makeup, the tightness around her mouth. Why is it so important that I come to this particular event? I asked quietly. For a moment, I thought I saw uncertainty flicker across her face. Because you're my husband, and it looks strange that you're never there. People talk. I wanted to say that she hadn't seemed concerned about my absence at dozens of previous functions. I wanted to ask what people were saying exactly. Instead, I found myself nodding. All right, I'll be there. Relief visibly washed over her. Thank you. It's at the Kensington Hotel, 7 p.m. Wear your black suit. She turned to leave, then paused. And Miles, try to be social. These people are important. After she left, I sat motionless in my studio. Something wasn't right. In 8 years of marriage, Elise had never pushed this hard for my attendance at a work function. She had long ago accepted my discomfort with corporate schmoozing. Why now? Why this event? I returned to my composition, but the melody that had been flowing so smoothly now felt discordant, jarring. Like a perfect harmony suddenly interrupted by an unexpected note that doesn't belong. I had no idea that agreeing to attend this one event would completely unravel what remained of our marriage. The Kensington Hotel ballroom gleamed with crystal chandeliers and polished marble. I tugged at my bow tie, feeling like an imposter among the pharmaceutical elite who laughed and networked with practiced ease. Elise glided through the crowd in a burgundy dress that hugged her figure, introducing me with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. And this is my husband, Miles. He composes film scores. The responses were always the same. Raised eyebrows, a flash of recognition. The mysterious husband. We were beginning to think Elise made you up. I smiled and shook hands, playing my role. For Elise's sake, I tried to engage, discussing projects I worked on, movies they might recognize. To my surprise, several people seemed genuinely interested. One woman even requested my business card for her brother, a documentary filmmaker. You're doing great, Elise whispered, squeezing my arm as we moved between groups. I caught a hint of genuine appreciation in her eyes, and for a moment, I remembered why I had fallen in love with her. Perhaps this night would bring us closer after all. Then I saw him approaching, tall, confident, with perfectly coiffed silver hair and a smile that seemed simultaneously warm and calculating. Before Elise could speak, he extended his hand. Miles Harrington. Finally. I'm Garrett Westfield. His grip was firm, almost challenging. I've heard so much about the man who creates music that moves millions. Elise speaks very highly of your talent. Does she? I couldn't hide my surprise. Elise hadn't shown interest in my work in years. Of course, Garrett's hand moved to Elise's lower back with practiced familiarity. Your wife is my most valuable asset at Meridian. I couldn't function without her. The possessive gesture wasn't lost on me, nor was the way Elise seemed to lean into his touch before catching herself. Garrett has been mentoring me for the national marketing position, she explained quickly, her cheeks flushed. More than mentoring, Garrett laughed. I'm her biggest champion, but enough shop talk. Miles, would you mind if I borrowed your lovely wife for a dance? There are some board members I need her charm. Before I could respond, he was leading Elise toward the dance floor. I watched as he pulled her close, closer than professional etiquette would dictate. Her hand rested on his shoulder while his settled at her waist. They moved together with the synchronicity of people who had danced before. As I observed them from across the room, Garrett leaned down to whisper something in Elise's ear. She laughed, tilting her head back, exposing her neck in a gesture of intimacy that sent a cold realization through me. The pieces clicked into place. The late nights, the weekend conferences, the secretive phone calls. It wasn't just work that had been keeping my wife away from home. I stood frozen, champagne flute in hand, watching my wife dance with her lover in a room full of people who probably knew exactly what was happening. The humiliation burned through me, followed by a quiet, controlled anger I hadn't felt in years. When they finally returned, I had composed my face into a neutral mask. But inside, something had fundamentally changed. I was no longer just a passive observer of my failing marriage. I had become something else entirely. The drive home from the Kensington was silent. I kept my eyes on the road while Elise checked emails on her phone, the blue light illuminating her face in the darkness. Neither of us seemed willing to acknowledge what had happened. You were quiet tonight, she finally said as we pulled into our driveway. Was I? I killed the engine. I thought I was quite social, as requested. She unbuckled her seatbelt. Garrett thought you seemed distant. He was trying to make you feel welcome. Is that what he was doing? I couldn't keep the edge from my voice. He has an interesting way of making husbands feel welcome. Elise stiffened. What's that supposed to mean? I turned to face her. How long has it been going on, Elise? I don't know what you're talking about. She reached for the door handle. My hand shot out, catching her wrist. Not hard, but firmly enough to stop her. In 10 years of marriage, I had never grabbed her like that. The shock in her eyes mirrored my own surprise at my action. Don't, I said quietly. Don't insult me by lying. Not after I watched you with him tonight. She yanked her arm away. You're being ridiculous. Garrett is my boss. We work closely together. That's all. Do you always dance that intimately with your boss? Does he always whisper in your ear until you blush? Does he always put his hands on you like he owns you? Color rushed to her cheeks. Not embarrassment, but anger. You have no idea what you're talking about. This is my career, Miles. My life. You've chosen to hide away in your studio rather than be part of it. You don't get to judge me now. I'm not judging your career. I'm questioning why my wife is having an affair with her married boss. The words hung between us, finally spoken aloud. Elise's eyes narrowed. If you go down this road, Miles, there's no coming back. Think very carefully about your next words. It was a threat, plain and simple. She was giving me an out, pretend I hadn't seen what I saw, and we could continue our hollow marriage. Safe. Predictable. Empty. If you leave this car to go to him right now, I said evenly, our marriage is over. For a moment, uncertainty flickered across her face. Then she hardened. You've never understood what it takes to succeed in my world. You've never even tried. She opened the car door. Don't wait up. I watched her walk into our house, presumably to pack an overnight bag. 5 minutes later, she emerged and got in her own car without a backward glance. As her taillights disappeared down the street, a strange calm settled over me. The worst had happened, and I had survived it. But this wasn't the end. Something else was taking root inside me. A cold, methodical determination that would have frightened me just hours before. Garrett Westfield had taken my wife. Now I would take everything from him. Morning found me in my computer, but I wasn't composing. For the first time in years, music was the furthest thing from my mind. Instead, I was researching. Methodically. Thoroughly. Garrett Westfield, 52. Regional Director for Meridian Healthcare. Married to Catherine Westfield for 23 years. 2 children in college. Residence in Brentwood Hills, the wealthiest neighborhood in the city. Member of the Oak Ridge Country Club. On the board of 3 charities. Perfect on paper, but everyone has secrets. I called my attorney, Frank Donovan, an old college friend who'd handled my publishing contract for years. I need a private investigator, I said when he answered. The best you know. Discreet, thorough, and not afraid to dig deep. Frank didn't ask questions. That's why we'd remained friends. I know someone. Ex-FBI. Not cheap. Money isn't an issue. 3 hours later, I met Alex Rivera in a coffee shop downtown. Mid-50s, unremarkable appearance, the kind of person you'd forget as soon as they left the room. Perfect for surveillance. I need everything on Garrett Westfield, I explained, sliding a folder across the table. Professional history, financial records, personal habits. I want to know who he meets, where he goes, what skeletons he's hiding. Rivera thumbed through the preliminary information I'd gathered. This is personal, he observed. Is that a problem? He shook his head. Just means you'll want thoroughness over speed. I can do that. He closed the folder. What about the woman? Your wife. I hesitated. Secondary target. I want to know where she goes when she's supposedly working. Who she meets. I want proof. Proof is my specialty. Rivera's expression didn't change. This will take time. Weeks. Maybe longer if you want it done right. Do it right. As he left, my phone buzzed. A text from Elise, staying at Melissa's for a few days. Need space to think. Melissa was her friend from college who lived across town. I knew exactly where Elise was, and it wasn't with Melissa. I didn't reply. Instead, I drove to the bank and transferred half our savings to a new account in my name only. Not out of spite, but strategy. I wasn't naive enough to think Elise wouldn't clean me out, given the chance. Next, I contacted my lawyer again to begin divorce proceedings quietly. No filing yet, just preparation. Frank recommended securing my assets and documenting everything. If she's having an affair with her boss, it could impact any settlement, he advised, especially if it's affected her work performance or led to preferential treatment. That night, alone in our house, I sat in my studio not playing a note. Instead, I began a different kind of composition, a methodical plan to dismantle Garrett Westfield's perfect life piece by piece. Elise hadn't just betrayed our marriage. She'd awakened something in me I hadn't known existed, a precise, cold determination that would have frightened me before. But now it felt like clarity. Patience had always been my strength. Now it would become my weapon. 3 weeks passed. I immersed myself in work, completing the film score ahead of schedule. On the surface, I was functioning normally. Underneath, I was waiting. Elise called twice, her voice carefully neutral. "I think we should talk soon." I agreed without emotion, making no move to initiate that conversation. Let her wonder. Let her worry. Then Alex Rivera called. "I have something." "Coffee shop." 1 hour. The manila envelope he slid across the table was thick. "It's all there," he said. "Bank records, hotel receipts, photos, text messages I managed to recover, and something extra, complaints. 3 of them." I raised an eyebrow. "Sexual harassment complaints against Westfield," Rivera explained. "Filed over the past 5 years by female employees at Meridian. All quietly settled and buried." I opened the envelope. The first photo showed Elise and Garrett entering a boutique hotel downtown. The timestamp indicated Tuesday, 2:15 p.m. Official work hours. "They meet there twice a week," Rivera said. "Tuesdays and Thursdays. Always the same room. Been going on for at least 7 months, based on the credit card records." I flipped through the rest. Photos of intimate dinners. Records of gifts Garrett had purchased, jewelry, clothing, written off as business expenses. A weekend trip to Napa Valley disguised as a regional conference. Then there were the complaints. 3 women, all describing similar patterns. Inappropriate comments, unwanted touches, professional pressure for personal relationships. All resolved with settlements and NDAs. The last woman, Rivera pointed to the 3rd complaint, was fired 6 months after settling. Officially for performance issues. Unofficially, Westfield made her life hell until she quit. I closed the folder. And my wife. Her position at the company. Rivera's expression was sympathetic. "The promotion to the national team? It's not based on merit. 2 more qualified candidates were passed over. Internal emails suggest Westfield personally championed her advancement despite concerns from other directors." The final piece clicked into place. Elise hadn't just betrayed our marriage. She'd compromised her professional integrity, the thing she claimed to value above all else. "There's one more thing," Rivera said, pulling out another envelope. "These are from last night. You should prepare yourself." These photos showed Elise and Garrett outside a jewelry store, then at an upscale restaurant. The final image captured them in an intimate embrace on the street, her left hand on his chest, her wedding ring noticeably absent. "Thank you," I said, my voice steady as I paid him the remainder of his fee. "This is exactly what I needed." That night, I sat at my piano for the first time in weeks. But instead of playing, I methodically organized the evidence, creating 3 separate files. One for my divorce attorney, one for Meridian Healthcare's board of directors, and one for Catherine Westfield, Garrett's unsuspecting wife. The pieces of my composition were coming together. Now it was time for the first movement to begin. Catherine Westfield lived in a Tudor-style mansion in Brentwood Hills, where pristine gardens and privacy hedges sheltered the wealthy from ordinary troubles. I knew Garrett was in Chicago for a pharmaceutical conference. With Elise, of course. The timing was perfect. I chose delivery rather than mail. More personal, more immediate. The courier service guaranteed hand delivery, signature required. The package was simple but elegant, a manila envelope inside a heavy cream-colored mailer. Inside, a USB drive containing selected photos, hotel receipts, text messages, and a handwritten note. "You deserve to know. I'm sorry it had to be this way." 2 days later, Rivera confirmed the bomb had detonated. Catherine had called her sister, who flew in from Boston. She'd contacted an attorney specializing in high-net-worth divorces. She'd changed the locks on their house. Then came the call I'd been waiting for. "Elise," her voice tight with barely controlled fury. "What have you done?" I sat at my piano, fingers lightly touching the keys without pressing them. Hello, Elise. How's Chicago? Catherine Westfield confronted Garrett last night. She had pictures, Miles. Records. Things no one should have been able to access. Her voice dropped to a hiss. This is you written all over it. Does it? I played a soft, melancholy chord. How interesting. Do you have any idea what you've done? Garrett's marriage is imploding. His personal life is in shambles. Much like our marriage, then. Silence stretched between us. When she spoke again, her voice had changed, calculating, almost impressed. I didn't think you had it in you. There's a lot you don't know about me, Elise. That's become abundantly clear. This won't end well for you, she warned. Garrett has influence, connections. When he realizes you're behind this, he'll what? I interrupted calmly. Come after the husband he's been cuckolding? Expose himself further? I don't think so. I could almost hear her mind working, reassessing me, realizing for the first time that the quiet composer she'd dismissed might be more dangerous than she'd imagined. We need to talk, she said finally. Face to face. When I get back. I agree. There's the matter of divorce to discuss. Another long silence. Miles, think carefully. We could still. Goodbye, Elise. I hung up and returned to my composition. Not the film score I completed, but a new piece. Something darker, more complex than anything I'd written before. The first movement in my symphony of revenge was complete. Garrett's perfect home life was shattered. The next movement would target something he valued even more, his professional reputation. I opened my laptop and composed a careful email to Meridian Healthcare's Board of Directors, Human Resources Department, and Legal Counsel. Subject line: Pattern of sexual harassment and professional misconduct by Garrett Westfield. The email would be sent from an anonymous account, but the evidence attached would speak for itself. As I press send, I felt no triumph, no vindication, only the calm certainty of a composer who knows exactly which note comes next. It took exactly 8 days for my email to the Meridian board to bear fruit. 8 days of working on my new composition, of ignoring Elise's increasingly desperate calls and texts. 8 days of waiting, like a spider in the center of its web. When it happened, the fallout was spectacular. Rivera called with the news. Westfield's been suspended pending investigation. They brought in outside counsel to review the harassment claims. The boardroom's in an uproar. I smiled as I hung up. The third movement was unfolding perfectly. That evening, Elise finally showed up at our house, storming through the door like she owned the place. Technically, she still did, at least half of it. You've gone too far, she fumed, throwing her purse onto the counter. She looked terrible, designer clothes still perfect, but dark circles under her eyes, skin pale with stress. Have I? I continued working on my sheet music, not bothering to look up. Garrett's been suspended. Someone sent the board a file with all the old harassment complaints. They're reopening every case, interviewing every woman who ever worked under him. Karma's a real beast, isn't it? I annotated a crescendo in the third movement. Elise paced the kitchen. I've been called in for questioning, too. They're asking about our relationship, about favoritism. My promotion is on hold. Everything I've worked for is hanging by a thread. Now I did look up, meeting her gaze steadily. You should have thought about that before you decided to sleep your way to the top. Her face went white, then red. How dare you? I earned that position. Did you? The evidence suggests otherwise. She froze. What evidence? I returned to my composition. The same evidence the board now has. Elise sank into a chair, the reality of her situation finally hitting home. This is going to tank my career, she whispered. Probably, I agreed. Actions have consequences, Elise. You played a stupid game, and now you're winning stupid prizes. She stared at me like I was a stranger. Maybe I was. The quiet, accommodating husband she'd taken for granted had disappeared, replaced by someone who hit back. Hard. What do you want? She asked finally. To punish me? To destroy everything I built? I'm just making sure you and Garrett experience the natural consequences of your choices. Nothing more, nothing less. You've changed, she said, almost in wonder. No, Elise. I've always been this person. You just never bothered to notice. She left without another word, the slam of the front door punctuating her exit like a perfect staccato note. 2 days later, the local business journal broke the story. Pharmaceutical executive suspended amid sexual misconduct investigation. The article mentioned multiple allegations and possible improper relationships with subordinates. Garrett Westfield's carefully constructed professional image was crumbling, brick by brick. And I wasn't finished yet. I picked up my phone and dialed Catherine Westfield's attorney. The final movement of my composition was about to begin. Catherine Westfield was exactly what I expected, elegant, composed, and righteously angry. We met at her attorney's office, a sleek space in a downtown high-rise that screamed old money and discretion. Mr. Harrington. She extended her hand. No smile, but no hostility either. Just cool assessment. Thank you for agreeing to meet. Mrs. Westfield. I shook her hand. I wish it were under better circumstances. Her attorney, a razor-sharp woman in her 50s, gestured for us to sit. Mr. Harrington has brought additional materials that may be relevant to your divorce proceedings, Catherine. I placed a flash drive on the polished table. Everything is here. Text messages, financial records showing gifts purchased for my wife using company funds, evidence of professional favoritism. I've included dates, times, and locations. Catherine studied me. Why are you doing this? Because we were both betrayed by people who took vows to honor us. I said simply. And because your husband's behavior extends beyond just an affair. The harassment of other women at Meridian should not be swept under the rug. She nodded once, decisive. The board is trying to handle this quietly, offering Garrett a resignation package. I thought they might. I'd anticipated this move. Corporations hate scandal. Not anymore. Catherine's smile was thin. Not after I informed them that as a major shareholder, my family's investment firm owns 6% of Meridian. I would consider any attempt to quietly dismiss these allegations as actionable negligence. I couldn't help but admire her steel. What do you need from me? Your testimony, her lawyer interjected, both for the divorce proceedings and potentially for the civil suits being prepared by former employees. Your evidence ties everything together. You'll have it, I promised. After the meeting, I walked through downtown, feeling oddly light. The final piece was in place. Garrett wouldn't just lose his marriage. He would lose his career, his reputation, possibly even his freedom if the financial misappropriation was serious enough. When I returned home, Elise was waiting. She looked hollow, defeated in a way I'd never seen before. It's over, she said flatly. Garrett's being terminated. No severance, no references. The board threw him to the wolves. And you? I asked, setting down my keys. Suspended pending investigation. They're calling it a conflict of interest review. She laughed bitterly. That's corporate speak for, we know you slept your way up but can't legally fire you for it yet. I nodded, feeling nothing. No triumph. No satisfaction. Not even anger anymore. Just emptiness. I never meant to hurt you, she said quietly. But you did, I replied. And now we both have to live with the consequences. She looked around our home, at the life we'd built and destroyed. What happens now? Now we get divorced. I said simply, and we move on. For the first time since this all began, I felt myself truly letting go, not just of Elise, but of the anger that had fueled me. The composition was complete. 1 year later, I sat on the balcony of my new apartment, overlooking the Pacific. The divorce had been finalized 6 months ago, surprisingly amicable in the end. Elise had no fight left in her after Meridian terminated her employment. The scandal had been too big, too public for them to keep her on. As for Garrett, his fall had been spectacular. Catherine's divorce settlement took half his assets. The civil suits from the harassment victims drained much of what remained. Last I heard, he was trying to rebuild his career at a small pharmaceutical startup in Arizona, his reputation permanently tarnished. I took a sip of coffee, watching the waves roll in. The film I'd scored had won several awards, leading to a flood of new projects. I was now in demand in ways I'd never been before. My phone buzzed. A text from Catherine Westfield. We kept in touch, two survivors of similar storms. Saw your film won another award. Congratulations. Dinner next week. Our relationship wasn't romantic. We were both too battle-scarred for that. But we'd found in each other a unique understanding. Two people who had been betrayed, who had fought back, and who were now rebuilding. Looking back, I often wondered if I should have handled things differently. Taken the high road, walked away with dignity rather than orchestrating Garrett's destruction. There were nights I questioned whether my actions had made me no better than him. But then I remembered how they had flaunted their affair, how they had humiliated me that night at the gala, how Garrett had called me a weakling to my face. And I knew I would make the same choices again. Some might call it revenge. I prefer to think of it as justice, the natural consequences of their actions brought to light rather than hidden away. The new composition I was working on reflected this journey, starting with quiet isolation, moving through dark passages of betrayal and calculated retribution, and finally emerging into something lighter, clearer, not innocent but wiser, not unmarked but stronger. I was no longer the passive man who had watched his marriage fade without fighting for it. That version of me had died the night of the gala. In his place stood someone who understood his own worth, who would never again allow himself to be disrespected. As the sun began to set over the ocean, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, I returned to my piano. The melody that flowed from my fingers was different from anything I composed before, more complex, more nuanced, with shadows and light intertwined. Like me, it carried echoes of pain, but was no longer defined by it. Like me, it had emerged from darkness into something new. Like me, it had found its strength,